Hello, welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat on ABC News, News Radio, online and iView. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Lichadelo.
We are into the dying days of the 2020 presidential campaign, Chaz, and as the candidates make their final push, we'll talk to one of America's top polling experts to see if he thinks Trump is crashing to defeat or not.
Look, there's bad news on the COVID front as well, much better news on the economic front, and we'll be taking your questions about what we can expect next week and after the election if things get kind of weird.
And to top it all off, we're going to be meeting two of Donald Trump's biggest fans, Diamond and Silk, and try and find out what it's like to be among just 5% of black women who support this president. But first, to the state of this race. And this is how it's looking on Friday, 4 days out from polling day. Joe Biden has maintained his lead in the Real Clear Politics average of national polls, almost 7.5 points today. President Trump has narrowed the margin from mid-October by 2 points, though, but national polls in the middle of that range, they've been in really all year. Never closer than 4 points and never wider than 10 points. It seems pretty baked in at the moment. In the weighted 538 polling average, Biden's lead is bigger, just under 9 points today, and they give Biden an 89% chance of winning the election. If we allocate the electoral votes based on the state polling averages, Joe Biden leads this week by 356 to 182. But Biden's lead in some of the key battleground states is razor thin. 0.4 of a point in Georgia, 0.6 in North Carolina, 1.4 in Florida, and that Florida number has got a couple of new, rather bullish on Biden polls in the mix. A Monmouth poll today puts Biden 6 points ahead. An NBC Marist poll has Biden leading by 4. Quinnipiac has Biden up by 3. And that Q poll as well is interesting. It says that just 17% of likely voters now say they plan to vote in person on election day. 17%, that's down from 40% in early October, saying that they were going to wait until election day. So turnout on Tuesday could be way down, and it's ultimately, I guess, Chaz, a matter of opinion as to who that is going to benefit.
Is that in Florida, you're saying?
That is in Florida specifically.
Okay, yeah, because the early vote in Florida is 77% of the turnout in 2016. So yeah, that might end up basically being the same turnout. I will say this on the early vote. We have been following the early vote numbers. As they stand at the moment, we've got 81 million early votes so far, 59% of the turnout from 2016. Yep. That's not the number I care about. The number I care about is 37 million mail ballots not yet returned. Now, a number of them will not be returned. Some people might decide not to vote. Some people might decide to vote in person. Yep. Some of them might be in the process of being returned right now. Some of them will be dropped off by hand. But we're now at a point within a week of the election, well, 5 days of the election now, where if people put them in the post now, they're not going to get there on time. Yeah, so in a lot of states, they do have the option of so-called drop boxes, drop-off points, but that's when they hand deliver them.
Where they hand deliver them, so they don't go through the postal system. However, as we know, in potentially competitive states like Texas, a lot of those drop boxes have been removed. So in Harris County, Texas, which is bigger than the state of Nevada, they've only got one drop box for the entire county. So people have got to drive 60, 70, 80 kilometres in order to drop off their ballot. And obviously, with the we're going to look a little later at the spike in COVID numbers, but for some people who were anticipating voting on the day, now they're seeing that we're well and truly into a second, or some are calling it even a third wave in the United States. And some of those more crucial states like Wisconsin are feeling the worst of it. Not only that, but it's also minus 10 degrees Celsius. And people are getting hypothermia at Trump rallies.
Yeah, and look, some of those states also do accept ballots after Election Day if they're mailed before Election Day. Some states don't. All I'm saying is some subset of that 37 million mail ballots not returned are going to be what we're arguing about in the Supreme Court, potentially, in 3 weeks' time. So I just wanted to flag that number. It's a big number. Yeah. But it's a much smaller subset, though.
That's right. And as we've talked about a number of times, these sort of court cases over big lumps of votes that are categorised one way or another, they tend to only matter if the election is very, very close.
Yes.
And that's what, at this age, we just don't know. There's this huge X factor over all this as to what is actually going to happen on the day and how soon we're going to know whether it's going to take a while to know the result or not.
Absolutely. But I've got one more poll before we move on, John. Yeah. This for me sums up where we're at. According to YouGov, 56% of Republicans say if Trump loses the election, it's because the Democrats stole it. Whereas 57% of Democrats say if Biden loses, it's because the Republicans stole the election. That's where we are.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, look, both President Trump and Joe Biden were campaigning in Florida today. For Biden, a win there could seal the deal. He doesn't need to win Florida, but just with the way that these electoral votes are going to add up, if he does win Florida, and it is a result that we could know quite early on Wednesday afternoon our time, then he could put it away surprisingly quickly. But for Biden right now, closing arguments are in, and now it's just get out the vote.
I believe when you use your power, the power to vote, you're going to change the course of this country for generations to come at home and abroad. This election is the most important one you've ever voted in, whether it's your first or 10th. Ladies and gentlemen, the heart and soul of this country is at stake right here in Florida. It's up to you. You hold the key. If Florida goes blue, it's over. It's over.
Rather unfortunate cough at the end there. Or maybe that was deliberate. Maybe he's reminding people of the whole thing. President Trump, meanwhile, seems to be struggling to believe that he could actually lose to that guy, and he's still fixated on the Democratic primaries. Take a look.
But we have no choice. We have to vote for Trump because it's between Trump and Sleepy Joe, and anybody beats Sleepy Joe. I could take a couple of these guys. They're friends of mine. They're not good people. They're better than Joe, I will tell you. Now, do you believe what I'm running against? I'm running against the worst candidate in the history of presidential politics. I don't care, win, lose, or draw. This is the worst candidate in the history. He shouldn't be there because Pocahontas kept going. Instead of getting out, then it would have been against Bernie, which would have been fine too. You know what? You would have had a more energetic base if we had Bernie. That's one thing. Because I don't know if they have a base.
Well, we're going to find out in a few days exactly who has a base and who's been able to reach beyond that base to assemble a winning coalition. But really interesting to see that President Trump is still doing these big rallies, despite the criticism that these have become super spreader events. And there is this anxiety amongst some Democrats that he is energising those base voters, and that particularly if COVID does mean that more Democrats are more anxious, and we do know that Democrats are more anxious than Republicans about voting in person next week, that in fact these same people that are prepared to risk it at rallies are going to risk it by voting in person next week.
I think it's fair to say anyone who turns up to a Trump rally is going to vote.
Yeah, but that is also the question about, and clearly Trump to an extent needs to be conducting these big rallies at the moment because he's broke. He's run out of money. He can't be advertising in the same way. So,
and it worked for him 4 years ago.
It worked for him, yeah, absolutely. And I get the sense this is a bit of a greatest hits album. Just go back to the same well that you went to last time, and that he thinks it was the rallies that won it for him last time. It wasn't Jim Comey or WikiLeaks or anybody else. It was probably all of the above. But for Joe Biden, he is taking this punt that by not holding lots and lots of rallies, by not energising the base of the party, he's relying on the organising and the advertising to get people to just push the button. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how enthusiastic somebody is. If they're going to vote, they can do so enthusiastically or unenthusiastically. It's still one vote.
And he's running on the small target strategy, which Australians know very well, although we have compulsory voting here.
Right.
They don't in America. That's the difference. Small target strategy is usually for compulsory voting. But anyway, talking about coalitions. We've been talking about how Biden and Trump have been pinching from each other's coalitions. Biden pinching white, non-college educated voters. Trump pinching male African Americans and male Latinos.
Yep. Biden also getting the over 65s as well.
Absolutely. Well, Trump scored the prize endorsement this week from Biden's coalition of Lil Pump, who I haven't been following too much. I know you're a big fan of his, John.
I love Lil Pump's work.
Well, you'll love his endorsement, that's for sure.
I gotta say is Trump 2020, bitch. I look like paying an extra 33 in tax for Biden, bitch ass. Sleepy Joe, Trump 2020, bitch.
It's a compelling argument, and one that I think is going to make Diamond and Silk a little later in the program look like Shields and Brooks.
But look, it's not all good news for Trump. He's been copping some heat for pretending he has a healthcare plan when he most definitely does not have a healthcare plan.
We have a plan that's going to be, I think, fantastic. It'll be released fairly soon.
We have a really terrific, I believe, healthcare plan coming out.
We're going to have a healthcare plan that's going to be second to none. We have two plans coming out in a very short period of time. The plan is coming out over the next 4 weeks.
We're going to produce phenomenal health care. We'll be announcing that in about 2 months.
We have a great plan coming out. We're signing a health care plan within 2 weeks. A full and complete health care plan.
We're going to be doing a very inclusive health care plan. I'll be signing it sometime very soon.
We're going to be introducing a tremendous health care plan sometime hopefully prior to the end of the month.
In June of last year, you said the health care plan would come in 2 weeks. You told Chris Wallace that this summer it would come in 3 weeks. You promised an executive order on pre-existing.
I have it already.
But the problem is that the healthcare plan is under the tax returns. You can't get them out.
Well, I hear the healthcare plan's been audited as well. Very, very intensive audit. Look, if we're going to pin Trump for having no plan, we should at least mention Joe Biden's plan. Let me describe how it works. Essentially, the way health insurance works in America for the non-elderly is the poorest people qualify for Medicaid, which is free healthcare for the poor. The wealthiest purchase private health insurance, but there's a bit of a gap between those who can afford private health insurance and those who qualify for Medicaid. So Obamacare provided massive income-dependent subsidies for those people so they could afford to buy Obamacare plans. Problem though is some red states pay so little in the Medicaid, the Obamacare subsidies don't reach all the way down, and millions of people still can't afford to get health insurance. So what Biden's doing is he's increasing all the subsidies so that no one misses out. His subsidies are also going to be bigger, so health insurance is cheaper for everyone who qualifies. That's point one. He's also going to legislate so people are charged lower out-of-pocket costs. Right now, people with private health insurance often have to pay thousands of dollars in deductibles before they can claim anything. He's going to lower the qualifying age for old people's cheap health care, which is Medicare, from 65 to 60. He's going to create his own government-owned health insurance plan to compete with the other private health insurance plans. That's called the public option. And anyone who has, for whatever reason, slips through the cracks from all those different little systems there and can't afford health insurance will be enrolled automatically in the public option for free. And all of that is coming to you for the low price of $850 billion extra deficit over a 10-year period. So, John, this election is about serious issues like that. Well, sure. Mostly serious issues.
This is about morality. This is about same-sex marriage not being approved and blessed in this country. This is not about us changing genders into 5 and 6 different meanings now. How far do they want us to go? Wait until animalism becomes acceptable and somebody can marry a cow and have perverse sex with them. You think I'm laughing? That's what's going to come. Those kind of things. And I know I'll be mocked, and I know that the Huffington Post and others will pick this up and run with it. But who could believe we'd be where we're at now?
Well, he's only right. He's going to get mocked.
Yeah, exactly. Still, that cow thing, that's huge if true. Now to take a deep dive into the state of this election and what we can expect to play out next week. We're joined by the uber nerd, Dave Wasserman of the Cook Political Report. We're lucky to have him. He is simply one of the most respected polling analysts in America today. Dave Wasserman, welcome to the Fireside Chat.
Thanks for having me.
So, Dave, a lot of polls flying around this week, of course, most of them pointing to a pretty comfortable Joe Biden victory. So what do you think the chances are at this stage of a 2016-style upset?
Perhaps 10% or a little less. And there are 3 reasons why the polls today are quite different from the polls we saw in 2016. The first is that back in 2016, around this time, when we looked at the district level polling that was done by the parties at the congressional level, there were flashing red warning signs for Hillary Clinton in districts with large populations of white voters without college degrees, places like northern Wisconsin or the southern tier of New York. And these indicated problems that weren't necessarily being picked up by the national media, and a lot of Democrats were in denial about them. This year, we see a lead for Joe Biden in the key congressional districts, and we see Trump badly underperforming in them versus his 2016 margins. The second factor is that Biden's lead has just been much more consistent than Hillary Clinton's was. The poll chart of the race in 2016 looked like an electrocardiogram where everything was bouncing up and down all the time. This time, Biden's been clearly in the lead the whole time, and in fact, his favorable ratings have improved as Trump has dialed up the intensity of his attacks. And then the third reason is that there are far fewer undecided and third-party voters at this time than there were 4 years ago. If you take a look at the final polling average in 2016, nationally it was something like Clinton 47 to 43. That meant that around 10% of voters were unallocated between the major parties. And we know, based on social science data subsequently, that Donald Trump won the lion's share of undecided voters or late deciders. Today, Joe Biden is leading around 52 to 43%. So that means that only 5% of voters, about half as many, are unallocated. And that reduces the potential for a late break towards one candidate or late volatility.
Now, Dave, you mentioned a third-party vote has basically disappeared since 2016, but the margins seem to be pretty much the same as 2016, at least at a state level. So what are the biggest differences in terms of demographic poll results since 2016?
Well, first of all, it's important to note that a lot of the pollsters at the state level have adjusted their methodology since 2016. What we realized after the fact was that a lot of pollsters were undersampling white voters without college degrees because traditionally it hadn't been that important to weight samples by educational attainment. Historically, Democrats and Republicans had done just as well among college graduates as non-college graduates, but in 2016, Trump blew the gap wide open. He won large shares of the vote among whites with high school degrees, whereas Democrats and Hillary Clinton carried white voters with college degrees. And what that meant was that in 2016, a lot of polls were essentially undersampling Trump's best demographic group. Most pollsters have taken steps to weight their samples by educational attainment this year. And so I have a bit more confidence in what we're seeing. And we're not seeing the kind of weakness among key demographic groups that we saw for Hillary Clinton. This time, Joe Biden is doing markedly better with both seniors and women, particularly white women, than in 2016, and that's meaningful.
And Dave, what do you make of these extraordinary numbers of early in-person and mail-in votes that we're seeing? Can we conclude anything from that except obviously that we're in the middle of a pandemic?
So we've got a lot of numbers flying out around here, and a lot of people are reading into the early vote turnout data. And in reality, it does suggest that we are headed for a massive turnout. We're likely to see between 150 million and 160 million votes cast in this election, which would shatter records. We had 137 million cast in 2016. But it doesn't tell us what the vote preferences of the final electorate are going to be, because we don't know how many people will show up on November 3rd on Election Day to vote. And so we're simply going to have to be patient. And what we know from the public opinion surveys is that Joe Biden has large leads among voters who are planning on voting by mail and voting in person before Election Day, whereas Donald Trump has a 32-point lead or so among voters who are planning on waiting until Election Day to vote.
Now, you mentioned that you get to see these secret district polls that we don't get to see. So what interesting things can you tell us that we wouldn't know from looking at the major public polls?
So, at the state level, all eyes are on some of the key battleground states such as Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And the truth is that there's a lot of very mediocre quality polling that gets highlighted in those states because certain pollsters who only survey online or have their own ideas of what's methodologically accurate but aren't that experienced just simply want attention. Some of the highest quality polling data out there never is seen by the public because it's conducted privately for the parties to try and make resource allocation decisions. And what that polling suggests, and because we have relationships with pollsters who want to share data off the record with us, we're seeing surveys that are even worse for Donald Trump than a lot of the state polling averages suggest. And these are polls that aren't just conducted by Democrats, but are conducted by Republicans as well. We're consistently seeing Trump underperform his 2016 margins by anywhere from 6 to 12 points across competitive districts in Pennsylvania and in Michigan. We don't have as many competitive congressional elections in Wisconsin, but the pattern is similar in neighboring states like Iowa and Illinois. So look, the fundamentals today are in a much different place than in 2016.
So there is this view that this election could actually come down to Pennsylvania as the decider. But from what you're saying about the private polling that is out there, could we be looking at an earlier night on election day than we're perhaps anticipating?
Well, the challenge is that Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin are not likely to report anywhere near final results on election night itself. We're going to be stuck with incomplete batches of voting results in a lot of states that are inexperienced when it comes to processing and counting large quantities of mail-in ballots quickly. Keep in mind that the upper Midwestern battleground states that are so critical, such as Pennsylvania, don't have experience with millions of mail ballots because they've never held an election in a pandemic, at least in the modern era. And the states that we might look to for clues on election night include places like Florida, North Carolina, and even Texas, places that do have robust infrastructure to be able to process and count a large number of absentee votes quickly and are likely to have something close to a final count by election night.
What states do you think are shaping up to be a surprise? The Democrats seem to be getting increasingly optimistic about Texas. Is Texas really a thing?
I do believe Democrats are in a position potentially to break through in Sunbelt states. And Georgia, a state that has not voted for Democrats for a couple decades, is a state that's exceptionally close in polls right now and that Joe Biden has a good chance to win. Texas would be an absolute coup for Democrats and Joe Biden. But there is a chance that Democrats with really unprecedented turnout could narrowly win Texas on a very good night. We'll be watching it closely, but I do think Joe Biden has something like a 40% chance of winning the state. And by the way, Florida is still very close. But keep in mind that these are all states that Donald Trump would absolutely need to win to have any chance of getting to an electoral college victory, whereas Joe Biden doesn't need any of those states. He simply needs to win back Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Arizona, and that would be more than enough. The Sun Belt states like Texas, Florida, and North Carolina would be icing on the cake for him.
For some Republicans now who are not too confident of holding on to the White House, maybe they're in the sort of bargaining phase of grief, but they're looking at the Senate and wondering whether they can just hang on there. What are you seeing there, Dave?
So Democrats have an excellent chance to pick up the Senate as well. The real question is whether Joe Biden is able to, if he wins, accumulate a technical Democratic majority of 50-50, in which case the vice president would break a tie, and that might be Kamala Harris, or whether he wins an outright majority of 51-49. It would be next to impossible to govern and get anything done, anything passed through a 50-50 Senate. He likely needs at least 51 seats to get an agenda through. And keep in mind that Democrats are in an excellent position to pick up 3 seats. They are ahead right now in Arizona, Colorado, Maine, and North Carolina, and they are likely to lose one in Alabama. So that would get them on a net basis to 50 seats. They're likely also to pick up Iowa, if the polls there today are correct, which would get them to 51. And then from there, they have additional opportunities in Montana, South Carolina, and there are 2 Senate seats up for grabs in Georgia. But the larger Democrats can pad their advantage in the Senate, then the easier it would be for Joe Biden to pass an agenda.
Dave, if you were Joe Biden, what would you be most worried about at the moment?
Yeah, the question right now is what could go wrong? And there are a few relative weaknesses for Joe Biden. One is that Democrats have struggled to register college students to the same extent they have in the past, considering that there's a pandemic and many college campuses are not at full strength. That's a voting group that typically breaks heavily for Democrats. Another might be that Joe Biden is not performing as well as Hillary Clinton did among Hispanic voters. That's been kind of the exception to the rule of demographic shifts in Democrats' direction. But it would require a massive polling error and an unprecedented surge of Trump's base voters, which are white voters without college degrees, to come to the polls. And it would require some depression of Democratic enthusiasm. Right now, we see both parties' bases as highly motivated and poised to turn out in record numbers.
Dave Wasserman, I know it's a super busy time for you, so thanks for taking the time for a fireside chat.
Okay, good luck.
So, Chaz, the polling numbers are important in determining the outcome of this election or telling us what's likely to happen, but the COVID numbers are where there's a lot of concern right now, and they could similarly, obviously, have a big impact.
They certainly could. Today, there are 90,000 new cases.
Wow.
Pushing towards 100,000 potentially by election day. Let's look at those cases. These are the daily cases, averaging over 75,000 cases a day now. That's the highest it's been all pandemic. Hospitalisations have been edging up as well, up to 45,000. That's heading towards a problem, but to be honest, still under control. And that's important because deaths these days seem to stay lowish as long as hospitals aren't being overrun. And that's still the case so far. The deaths are hanging at around 800 a day. Unfortunately, this wave is getting out of control in a whole bunch of states, and that is best illustrated by the percentage of tests that come back positive. Remember, you want tests to be no more than about 5% positive if you possibly can, if you want to stay on top of a virus. Well, look at these states here. They're ranging from 18% positive tests in Utah all the way up to 55% of tests coming back positive in Wyoming. South Dakota there seems to be a real hotbed at the moment. Over 0.1% of their population is catching COVID every day at the moment. And key swing state Wisconsin's also in a lot of trouble, which might explain some of the insane poll results we've been seeing lately coming from there. Now, these numbers are all a bit grim though, so it's interesting to see how some states have been softening their impact on the community.
As of today, there have been 38,160 cases of COVID-19 in Oregon, with 390 new cases being reported today. Sadly, we are also reporting 3 deaths today, bringing the statewide total for COVID-19 related deaths to 608.
Okay, I'm presuming that's Halloween related?
Yeah.
Either way, definitely ill-advised.
I'm now officially scared of clowns.
Unfortunately, COVID is not a laughing matter, as demonstrated by the ever-ubiquitous Lincoln Project, who have ended the campaign with what I think might be the most hard-hitting COVID-related ad of all.
Your girls are on the telephone, Joyce. Joyce? You can say something. She can hear you now.
Hi, Mom. Hey, Mom. How are you doing?
The girls say hi, Joyce. Your mom moved her fingers like she's waving.
I wish we could be there with you, Mom.
They say they want to be here with you, Joyce.
She knows that we can't, right?
They can't because of the COVID. Joyce. Yes, she knows. Yes, she does. She nodded.
We love you, Mom.
Love you, Mom. Your girls love you, Joyce. She nodded again a little.
Bye, Mom.
They say goodbye, Joyce.
On November 3rd, vote Biden-Harris. Life's too important not to.
Whoa.
Hard to watch.
Yeah, that's very effective. Anyway, on the other hand, there is some good news for the Trump administration. The latest GDP growth figures have come out. They came out last night. And if the third quarter growth continued for a year, it would be an annual GDP growth rate of 33%. But of course, that kind of growth wouldn't keep going for a year. So what it realistically is 7.4% growth since the last quarter, which is still a huge number. As Trump tweeted, it's the biggest and best growth in the history of America. Twice the previous record, actually. And he said he was so glad that this great GDP number came out before November 3rd. Of course, they only achieved such massive growth because they were climbing out of a massive hole. The GDP is still actually 3.5% smaller than before the pandemic hit, which is almost as much as the entire contraction for the GFC. This is what it looks like on a graph. They still have a lot of catching up to do yet. Unfortunately, probably because of the lack of stimulus being passed recently, the economy's climbing is kind of getting a lot slower, climbing slower and slower. That huge growth figure was actually a comparison between the last 3 months average GDP and the average of the 3 months prior. But if you look at, say, the total payroll employment in America, you can see the growth in jobs is really starting to slow down. And that is what they need to watch out for, because America does not need another 5 years of post-recession stagnation.
Yeah, and it's impossible to know, obviously, with this new wave of COVID infections, the possibility of a mask mandate under a hypothetical Biden administration, what President Trump might do if he loses, or indeed if he wins. We don't know what policy changes around this space there might be, whether states have any kind of a desire at all to shut down again. Look, this week on Planet America, we did ask you if you had any questions about next week's election, and hundreds came in, and we've carefully picked out some of the easiest. Actually, there are some really great questions here. We picked them because they're typical or they're particularly interesting. I've got one for you here, Chaz. Tom wants to know, why is the election midweek?
Okay, I did some work for you, Tom, on this one. Now, as you know, it's on Tuesday. That's so people can take a day to travel to their polling location by horse and buggy for a day, apparently, back in the 1800s.
Yeah.
But they didn't have to leave till after the Sabbath. It's been like that since 1845. Now, America's not the only country with weird election days. Canada's on Monday, Israel's on Tuesday, Netherlands and South Africa are on Wednesday, Denmark and the UK are on Thursday. But most of the world does weekends, obviously, and the result of this weird schedule, according to Pew Research, America is 26th out of 32 developed countries in voter turnout. In fact, if the last election did not vote been a candidate in 2016, they would have won 471 out of 538 electoral college votes. So a weekend vote bill and a holiday vote bill has never made it out of committee. They've tried to pass them, never gotten even a vote. 14 states do have election days a state holiday, though, which helps. And in 2018, according to the Pew Research, 65% of people supported an election day national holiday. I don't know if it's ever going to happen. It'd be nice.
Well, the cynic in me says that politicians are never going to change the system that got them into office, but the other thing to add to that as well, Tom, is the reason they have it in November on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November is, well, Halloween's the clue. It's after the harvest. So those people in buggies going to vote in 1845, they were farmers who had finished their harvest, gone to church on the Sunday, gotten in the buggy, gone to vote on the Tuesday. Because in those days, of course, it was only white men who owned land who were allowed to vote. And they tended to be farmers, so it was built around the farmers.
Fair enough. Question for you from Adriana. What will be the equivalent of exit polls this year with so many voting early or by mail? A number's being compiled during the voting weeks and will be added to the ones on November 3.
Yeah, so it is different this year because maybe 60% of the total vote is going to be happening and has happened, as we've seen, in advance through either in-person early voting or mail-in early voting. So the media firms, including the Associated Press, which does the biggest of the exit polls, they recognise that for the exit polls to have any meaning or consistency to be at all representative, they needed to be exit polling people who were voting early rather than just doing it on the day. They'd already recognised that there is an inherent problem with on-the-day exit polling because, like the same problem with a lot of polls, you've got people who are, basically college-educated white people are a lot more likely to talk to somebody with a clipboard standing outside a polling station. So they do weight responses there, but it was one of the reasons why the exit polls in 2016, for instance, all said, hey, Hillary Clinton's going to win this election. She's running away with it. And then, of course, Trump came back when the actual votes were counted. Trump voters are in that demographic who, the sociologists use measures of social trust. And they basically say these people don't trust the media, they don't trust some random person with a clipboard, go to hell, I'm going home, etc. So they don't talk to exit pollers. But all of that, even though these exit polls may be pretty good this year or may not be pretty good, we won't know until months and months later whether they were any good or not. And the main thing about exit polls is it's election day. These things come out when polls close. Forget about it telling you how people voted. Is Trump going to win? Is Biden going to win? It's why they voted that matters. These things are useful because they say coronavirus was the number one issue, closely followed by the economy. That could tell you it could be a close race. If it's COVID, and then nobody cares, healthcare is a distant second, then you'd say, reading those tea leaves, maybe this is going to help Biden. But again, you need to be very, very judicious in the way that you use exit polls in any year, particularly this year.
I should add to that Aaron Mishkin, who's the chief boffin at Fox News, he dropped out of exit polls back in 2016 because he thought they were becoming too inaccurate. And he's been working for the last 4 years on this new system of surveying 100,000 people directly before the election.
Right.
And that is what Fox
This is
News...
a big focus group approach.
Yeah, and that's what Fox News is going to deliver during the election, which means the fact that people are mail-in voting or not mail-in voting will be irrelevant.
Yep.
So they may have the most accurate of the polls. And it'll be interesting because Aaron Mishkin was the one who butted heads with Karl Rove back in 2012 when Karl Rove didn't like him calling Ohio for Obama. And Aaron Mishkin was right. Aaron Mishkin is a Democrat who voted for Hillary Clinton. I could see him butting heads with, say, Tucker Carlson or someone like that if Trump wants to call the election early. And Mishkin goes, no, we've got our form of exit polls, our survey, which just says you should not be calling the election at this point in time. There might be a big argument on the Fox set. Look out for it.
Yeah, and my sense is all the networks who have their decision desks, including panels, including Dave Wasserman, they are going to be very, very cautious. They're going to be calling these races on 95% reporting, not on 50% reporting. They're going to be very, very careful. Question for you, Chaz, from Naomi. She wants to know, could the people in the Electoral College just vote for whoever they want and choose the president even if the people didn't vote for them?
Okay, now they have a name. They're called faithless electors.
All right.
And they exist. There have been 19 of those faithless electors since World War I. 10 of them were in 2016.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, like there's 3 Democrats vote for Colin Powell, 1 Democrat vote for Bernie Sanders.
I remember the Bernie one, yeah.
One was for some Native American activist called Faith Spotted Eagle.
Huh.
I don't know. 1 Republican vote for John Kasich, 1 for Ron Paul. And then there were 3 attempted votes that were invalidated, right? They appealed to the Supreme Court, and what the Supreme Court said, you actually can punish faithless electors.
Right.
And so what that means is that now there are 30 states that have laws that basically either bind faithless electors or punish them, which means that...
Punished after they've been faithless?
Well, yeah, basically, yeah. But basically force them to vote.
Sure.
To vote their way, which means there's still 20 states that don't have those laws. So theoretically, those 20 states, the electors could decide the election even today, and that would be very 2020.
Yeah, it sure would. And on our election night program, I've put together a new explainer talking through the way the Electoral College works, because a lot of people want to know, and it is a pretty convoluted thing. But we will, before we get too much into the show on Wednesday night, we will explain that for you so you have your head around that.
Sure. Question for you, John, from Lucy. If Trump is defeated in 2020, is he then eligible to run for a second term in the future? And off that, Ethan also asks, if Trump loses in 2020, do you believe he would run again in 2024, Grover Cleveland style?
Yes, so part of the answer to the first question is in the second question. Yes, you can serve as president 2 non-consecutive terms. In fact, up until 1951, when the 22nd Amendment was ratified, you could serve infinite numbers of terms if you wanted to. Until Franklin Roosevelt, there had been this precedent going back to George Washington saying, well, if Washington walked away after 2 terms, such a great man, it would be presumptuous of any other president to stay beyond 2 terms, which is why, for instance, Teddy Roosevelt, who served a term and 2/3 after inheriting the presidency from McKinley, didn't run again in 1908 when he could have. But he then tried to come back again in 1912 and split the Republican vote. So yes, Grover Cleveland, he is the 22nd and the 24th president of the United States in one person. After the passage of the 22nd Amendment, it stopped somebody like Franklin Roosevelt serving for 4 terms or 4 elections. It says you can only be elected twice, a maximum of twice, for a maximum of 8 years. So, and that also affects somebody who inherits the presidency as well. So you can only stand twice. But yeah, Donald Trump could run again in 2024 if he loses next week. And I wouldn't put it past him. Or if he doesn't run, then, it's going to be Don Jr. or it's going to be Tom Cotton being as Trumpy as he can. I don't think either constitutionally or constitutionally the Trumps are going anywhere too soon. But Rode has a question for you, Chaz. Wants to know, can you please explain the voter registration on Planet America? Why are people registered as Democrats and Republicans when they enroll to vote?
That's a great question. Look, they started registration in 1800 in Massachusetts, and it took basically 100 years for it to slowly spread through the rest of the country. It was largely, originally, let's be honest, a means ways of keeping poor people, Irish Catholics and immigrants from voting, essentially. And then it was used against black people later in the century as well. These days, the only state without registration is North Dakota. The rest of them have it, but they have found a use for it, and that is in primaries. They essentially use it to determine who qualifies to vote in each party's primary in a number of states. That's the modern usage. There isn't much else. That's kind of, it's a bit of an artifact. Although having said that, while it might seem like a triviality, some people think the registration process is one of the great impediments to voting, because 90% of Americans who are registered to vote actually do cast ballots. The people who don't vote aren't registered. Now, are they not registered because they don't care? Is it a chicken and egg thing? We don't know. But 19 states have enacted automatic voter registration policies now. And when they did, generally turnout did go up a bit. So not massively, but a bit. 65% of people in 2018 said they favoured automatic registration, so it might be about to be a national thing. The Democrats want it to be a national thing.
Yeah, in some states they got this motor voter thing. When you get your driver's licence, you also get your voting registration card. Yep. Which is interesting. Yep. You got one for me? Yep. Mickey. It's like Christmas. My turn for a question.
What happens if Trump loses the election and refuses to leave the White House? This is a common question. Also from Kate, does the US have an equivalent to a caretaker period? Can an outgoing government ram bills through between 4th of November and 20th of January? What recourse does a new administration have to undo those bills?
Good questions. So there is no caretaker period. The president is the president until midday on the 20th of January next year. So Donald Trump has full powers until then. The Congress, though, it has full powers through until the 3rd of January. That's when the new Congress will come in. So if President Trump wants to work with Democrats, who will still have the House majority as of the 4th of November, and Republicans who will still have the Senate majority, if they want to, for instance, pass some kind of another COVID relief package, which you doubt, I suspect they might, but either way, hypothetically, they could do that. And they can spend money, they can legislate, they can do anything else. The president also has full executive powers as well, so he can sign executive orders, which are basically unlimited. He can do whatever he wants except spend money. So he can only sign executive orders that use existing agencies like the EPA. He can regulate things, he can relax standards for emissions, he can say, let's drill in the middle of Yosemite National Park. He can do whatever he wants. But the next president can immediately reverse it at 1 minute past midday on the 20th of January. Any executive action can be overturned by the next executive, although unlike getting something through Congress. If you get something through Congress, it's very hard to get the next Congress to repeal and replace it. Just ask Republicans who've been trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act for more than a decade now. It's really, really hard to gather together the votes that do it. So, look, as for what Trump might do, I suspect he's just going to be sitting at the Resolute desk and going, okay, first of all, I'm pardoning Roger Stone, I'm pardoning Paul Manafort, I'm pardoning Michael Flynn, I'm pardoning myself. There is a legal debate as to whether Trump can pardon himself. Richard Nixon was told in 1974 that it was legally dubious to pardon himself when he hadn't been charged with crimes, that there were, so that's why he resigned and Jerry Ford pardoned him straight away. So look, a lot of things could happen, a lot of sort of nightmare scenarios. I'm an optimist in these things. I suspect it's going to be all quite mundane, but hey, I've been wrong before, Chaz.
I think it will be as well for that. For what's worth, all I would add is that obviously they can't pass a bill without the Democrats, so it's not going to be able to ram through anything. But the other area you didn't mention was regulations from agencies rather than from Trump. And there is something you guys should know about, you probably don't, called the Congressional Review Act, which basically says if anything that's been passed within 60 congressional days can go for a long time, okay, can be reversed with a congressional vote within that 60 legislative days without a filibuster. You cannot filibuster it. So 50 Senate votes will do it. If the Democrats take the Senate and Joe Biden is the president, they can reverse anything any agency does in 60 congressional days. What does that mean? That means basically anything from April this year can be that was passed by an agency, a regulation, can be immediately undone. Not just immediately undone, but they basically salt the earth so that that agency cannot pass the same kind of rule ever again.
Wow.
So there's a lot of power there. So that's something that they can do when they come in.
So don't start fracking the Grand Canyon because then you'll never be allowed to do it. Greg wants to know, with postal voting, there are some states that aren't even able to start looking at ballots until the election closes. But will there be basic numbers, i.e. total postal votes, available on Wednesday, just to have some idea about where things sit?
Okay, so every state should know how many mail-in ballots they've received up to election day, of course, but like I said before, some states will be receiving mail-in ballots for days afterwards. Like, for instance, Pennsylvania, they're counting ballots that arrive up to 3 days after the election. North Carolina's counting up to 9 days after. Ohio is counting ballots they receive up to 10 days after the election, as long as all those ballots were sent before the election date, obviously. Now, presumably those ballots arriving after the election are going to be a small number, but whether states choose to release the information they have about ballot numbers, it's up to them. Some will, some won't, I expect. But as Greg said, the main issue is when they start processing ballots, because they've got to open up the envelopes. They've got to sort them based on the precinct that the voter is in, which can be quite time-consuming. They've got to make sure the voter's signature checks out, also time-consuming, plus any other requirements like witness signatures, barcodes a lot of them have, any other details they need to provide. Then they have to prepare the votes for counting. It can take weeks. It has taken weeks in the past. Now, in the case of North Carolina and Florida, they start processing mail-in ballots 3 weeks before the election. Arizona, 2 weeks before the election, which is why, if you saw my election checklist on Wednesday, I suggested those 3 states will return results early because they'll be ready to go. Unfortunately, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin don't start the process until election day. And Michigan starts it the day before election day. So that is why I and Dave Wasserman before said they are extremely unlikely to return a proper count in those 3 states for days, if not weeks. John.
Yes.
Very quick one. Lisa asks, what will you two be drinking next Wednesday while you watch?
You're trying to do a bit of product placement on the ABC. Look, I think it's going to be something very mundane for me, some black coffee, just to keep, because we're going through until 11 o'clock, 11:30 on Wednesday night.
I'm going to be drinking my own tears. I am so very tired.
And some bizarre fruit-flavoured soft drink, no doubt. Anne wants to know, will Planet America keep going on regardless of who wins the US election? Is she talking specifically about this show or about America itself?
That's an interesting question, the latter.
We're back next year. We're having fun.
You try and get rid of us.
Yeah.
We're unemployed if we don't do that.
Yeah, what else would we do? Now, the 2020 US election is nearly here, of course, and the ABC wants to hear your questions and your thoughts about it to help us shape our remaining coverage. If you have a question that we didn't answer today, you can submit it to abc.net.au/US election. Now, Donald Trump's 2016 campaign had no shortage of, shall we say, characters associated with it. Prominent among them were Diamond and Silk, the Trump-loving, fast-talking, wisecracking YouTube stars who riffed their way to fame, becoming regulars on Fox News and at conservative events.
And if you are a freeloader, we need you to get up off your seat and do nothing. And go get you a job.
A J-O-B. That's right.
Diamond and Silk, otherwise known as sisters Lynette Hardaway and Rochelle Richardson, have had their ups and downs this year, being taken off Fox News for claiming that COVID was being exaggerated to damage Trump. Now, they accused Fox of a racist double standard, given that other hosts like Tucker Carlson had said pretty much the same thing. But they refused to talk about that when I spoke to them. But they did answer some other questions. Here's a taste. Now, as I understand it, you both supported Barack Obama both times he ran. So why in 2015 did you ditch the Democrats and decide to support Donald Trump?
Because we wanted a businessman and not a career politician running things around here. We wanted someone that had the master plan to truly make this place great again. And we betted on Trump. We betted right. We voted right. And that's why he's in office
That's
today.
right. And we didn't ditch Obama. We ditched the Democrat plantation and switched to Donald J. Trump.
Right.
I wonder, how do your family and friends feel about your vocal support for Donald Trump, given that more than 90% of African Americans still support the Democratic Party?
Well, now people are starting to wake up and smell the coffee.
Yes.
You can say back in 2015, when we started stumping for Donald J. Trump, we was in the midst of a revolution. We have the battle scars to prove it. So when you see Black America speaking out and saying, hey, we're going to vote for President Donald J. Trump, what you see is the evolution. You see people evolving. You see people are expanding their horizon, expanding their minds, wanting something better, looking at the person that has been in office for almost 4 years and has done amazing things for our community. And that's what you see, the evolving of, hey, we're going to vote for President Donald J. Trump.
And what do you say to concerns that Donald Trump is an out-and-out racist, whether it was his fostering of the birther movement against Barack Obama or his inability to condemn groups, including the Proud Boys? What do you say to that?
First of all, President Trump is not a racist. What he is a realist, and the only color he sees is green, and he wants you to have some of it. And this thing about us or him questioning Barack Hussein Obama and his birth, let me tell you who started that whole fiasco. Hillary Clinton, who we consider her name crooked. She the one started that when she was running against Obama. So let's not get it twisted, okay? President Trump don't indulge in white supremacy. Now let's question Jim Crow Joe Biden, who said he reached across the aisle to a segregationist. He didn't have to reach far because it was right there in his party. Who was hand in hand with a former KKK member right there in the Democrat Party. So if anyone should be denouncing white supremacy, it should be the Democrat Party, and it should be Jim Crow Joe Biden.
That's right.
You have both faced a lot of criticism that you have both effectively been used as racial props by Donald Trump and other conservatives. How do you respond to that?
Well, you know, the more they hate, the more we continue to educate. And we let people know that we can no longer vote for a system that keeps handing us crumbs. The only time we see them is every 4 years when they need a vote. It's time to vote out these career politicians, vote in a businessman who have the master plan to truly make this place great again. And keep in mind, our haters make us greater. You want to know why Diamond and Silk is so great? It's because of all of the hate that came from our haters.
Lynette and Rochelle, Diamond and Silk, thank you for being with us on the Fireside Chat.
Thank you, and thank you for having us.
That's all the time for this Fireside Chat. Join us on Tuesday night when we take over the drum. They were only going to talk about America anyway, so we thought we're going to take it over and we're going to call it, I don't know, Planet Drum America.
Plan Drum? No.
Why not?
Plus, we're going to have the real Planet America live from 9 p.m. next Wednesday on ABC News and at the regular time of 9:30 p.m. on ABC TV. It is a 2-hour election night spectacular.
It is going to be spectacular. We've got some great guests lined up, including veteran journalist Bob Woodward, who I'm very excited about. Senator Jeff Flake is supposed to talk to us, as is Ambassador Carol Moseley-Brown. Lots and lots of Planet regulars as well. Better not jinx it.
And I've also got another podcast for you right there, right now. Get into it.
Good night.